All right, picking back up, how do I know my students learned anything? Throughout the service learning experience, did my students demonstrate the ability to perceive social problems, concern about social justice issues, empathy for different points of view, the ability to view social problems as systemic, citizenship skills, a willingness to volunteer, a sense of social responsibility, and a willingness to work on behalf of social justice? If you can answer yes to these questions, well, likely that they did learn something. Um, you might ask, well, what about the actual, I need to grade something? Well, those writing assignments that we just spoke about, you can decide for yourself how to assess them. That's not what this article is about. The question, learned anything, is more abstract and not so concrete in this sense. How does this work benefit the communities we live in? Well, the communities that we live in typically have a common interest in student learning because that benefits the whole community. They have a need for labor power, which students can be a great source of manpower. They're young, they're vital. Um, Direct positive contributions to organizational mission, and give access to the resources of higher education. That can be very beneficial, and it could be resources, monetary resources, or it can be academic resources. Maintaining positive relationships in the community. And this is, once again, it's on the instructor. If you made sure that your students were culturally competent, that's a good start. If you began with a really strong foundation, that good relationship with the community, also a great start. But throughout the process, instructors should take the initiative to communicate. They should follow up frequently, site visit regularly, and that's important because you might be following up through emails or phone calls, but that doesn't mean that you're getting the perspective and experiences of some people who are actually interacting with your students. You might be emailing between the leaders, but not the people who have to deal with your students. You need to lead by example. You should be there and you should be contributing. And for example, if you were producing media, you should produce some media too, and you should show them how it's done. That's always important in a classroom. Never ask your students to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself. And develop good rapport. That goes without saying. The end goal here is to achieve a sense of mutual benefit and equal exchange between the students and the community. If that sense of mutual benefit and equal exchange doesn't occur, especially on the community end, do you think that that community program or initiative is going to invite you or your future students back? Likely not, and that would be a shame. All right, so moving on to Article 2. Those were pages 77 through 93, Dreaming of Democracy by Anna George. Starting off with a nice quote. Nothing less than the very thorough training in the discounting or rhetorical persuasiveness can make a citizenry truly free. Kenneth Burke, from Linguistic Approach to Problems of Education. So what are critical pedagogies? They envision a society not simply pledged to, but successfully enacting the principles of freedom and social justice, and those can include liberatory, empowering, radical, progressive, or pedagogies simply of hope and love. Critical pedagogies attempt to reinvent the roles to teachers and students in the classroom and the kind of activities they engage in. Definitely a more student-centric, student-centered classroom. To educate for freedom, we have to challenge and change the way everyone thinks about pedagogical process. Paul Freire is a very important individual. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed in 1970. He presents his well-known critique of the banking model of education, in which basically it's what it sounds like, a bank. You're depositing knowledge into the students without any sort of critical thought. It's just an information transfer. Instead, you should practice a problem posing dialogue, and that can help students reach those higher levels of thinking, the ability to define, analyze, and problematize the economic, political, and cultural forces that shape their lives. It's very much about oppressor versus the oppressed and looking at things from that viewpoint. I wonder, as I read this, I wondered if Pink Floyd was inspired by this type of belief system, even if they weren't directly familiar with Pedagogy of the Oppressed, because it says schooling is an instrument of domination. And it just got me thinking, we don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. Paul Freire probably would like Pink Floyd. Because language and thought are inextricably linked, language instruction becomes a key site where dominant ideology is reproduced or disruptive. So that's two different possible outcomes. Either students simply regurgitate what they're told, or they begin to question it for themselves and think for themselves. The radical critique of public education in the early studies by Giroux. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm going to go with Giroux. The hidden curriculum, the subtle but powerful ways schools construct students' and teachers' knowledge and behavior, validating positivism and competitiveness over other forms of knowing and behaving. I'm sure that you've encountered some competition in the classroom, and students are rewarded more for their outlook than they are for their critical thinking skills. Don't rock the boat. Give voice to the poor and marginalized, but also reach countless idle-class Americans who have withdrawn from public life into a world of sweeping privatization, pessimism, and greed. And these are direct quotes from the text. I wanted to point that out. All right. Jonathan Kozol wrote Illiterate America. Schools, that is, function as sorting mechanisms to inculcate and maintain passive acceptance of inequality. In critical teaching in everyday life, Shore, that would be Ira Shore, presents a blistering Marxist critique of the community college system, developed during the late 1950s and bulging by the late 1970s as a warehouse for surplus workers. Community colleges, he argues, simultaneously feed off and short-circuit the American dream by building a large pool of skilled workers for a shrinking number of increasingly de-skilled jobs. This is a problem that we continue to face today, is there's a lot of very well-educated individuals that are crippled by student loan debt, and there aren't enough jobs for them. It really kind of pulls the rug out from under people trying to achieve the American dream. Giroux calls public pedagogy, distributed by, in bell hooks terms, the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal mass media. That might have been true at the time. I definitely think that we've moved towards a more leftist outlook on pedagogy. The aim, then, of mainstream critical pedagogies is to revitalize students' conceptions of freedom and inspire them to collectively create a society built on democratic values and respect for difference. Now, the author, Anna George, refers to herself several times in this article as a Marxist. So it's inherently from a leftist perspective, and that's okay. Just pointing that out. 5 central questions. What does a critical writing classroom look like? Can we create democratic classrooms within traditional institutions? Is the goal to produce radical student activists? How? Is Freire pedagogy applicable to American schools? How might we understand student resistance to leftist critiques? And that's all I'm saying, is I was pointing out the bias, which isn't very concealed anyway. That's the whole point, is how do we institute leftist pedagogies and outlooks into the American student at this higher education. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's an ensemble of practices and discourses with competing claims put in service of of social justice. As previously mentioned, there's a lot of different types of critical pedagogy, and that wasn't even an exhaustive list. This was some very, very good things to come out of Ira Shore as far as how to endear yourself to your class and run a democratic classroom. So for my first day of class, Shore would foreground student writing and voices, asking students to critically examine course material and institutional power. Everything from what is good writing to how do you become a good writer? Why are you taking this course? Why is it required? And then he poses the subject matter itself as a problem. And this way they become comfortable questioning authority, because he is the authority figure in the classroom, but how can you question authority when it's authority asking you to question authority? It's paradoxical, and this could help put students at ease. Students in Shore's classes co-create the syllabus by contributing readings and voting on unit themes, write classroom bylaws, and negotiate grading contracts right down to the attendance policies. This, to me, is a good example of how a lot of these ideologies and beliefs are already in the curriculum, because that's exactly what I was taught in classroom management, is to make it a democratic environment. It's nothing new or radical there. When students have power, Shore's knowledge and authority had not been erased. Instead, another avenue of power had been constructed. It's a two-way street. That kind of first day encounter and working together to create the syllabus and the classroom environment, you're immediately and continually accountable to students. Both students and teachers start out as less than zero and more than zero simultaneously. Both bring resources and obstacles to class. Simultaneous criticism of and entanglement in dominant culture can become a problem that instructor and students sort through together. But accounts of critical classrooms, including those by compositionists, typically emphasize the critical rather than the writing part of critical writing pedagogies. It usually is fairly skewed. That's why I think that the community engaged based pedagogies can help to fix that discrepancy, because you definitely want writing in your writing class, even if it is critical writing. Show me the writing classroom. Importantly, the class project revealed that the text was a corporate process in which social relations were reaffirmed, reproduced, realigned, and refabricated. Like Lee, then, Winkleman suggests that critical composition pedagogy challenges not just how, but what we grade. Can classrooms be democratic? Absolutely, of course. As I've already stated, that's a huge part of classroom management skills. Giroux and others seek to recover the nearly forgotten American tradition of radical education found in the work of John Dewey, whom Shore dubs the patron saint of American education. If you'll recall, our very first quote from the first article was by John Dewey. Dewey pioneered experiential, student-centered learning aimed at integrating education with public life and developing the free and equitable intercourse hence the shared interests essential for communal life.